Now let us start today's biology online class. In the last session, we ended our discussion with nutrition and different modes of nutrition in different organisms in detail. In the process of nutrition, we have discussed that the food we eat is digested and absorbed in the digestive system. The assimilated food enters into the blood capillaries in the form of soluble molecules. These molecules consist of glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, glycerol, etc. Along with the blood capillary system, these assimilated food molecules reach the body, tissues and cells. Inside the cells, the assimilated food is used for two purposes. It is oxidized to get energy for doing so many various activities. For example, glucose is used to obtain energy, and it is used to get materials required for growth and repair of the body, that is proteins, amino acids, etc. Now, in this session, we can start with the life process, respiration. In this process, we can study how energy is released or obtained from the assimilated food molecules. The energy is released from the assimilated food molecules by the process of oxidation. So, for the release of energy, we need oxidation. How will we get this oxygen? The oxygen is present in the atmosphere. About 21% of the air in the atmosphere is oxygen.
So now, what is respiration? We have already discussed that it is a life process which involves two processes, that is breathing and cellular respiration. Breathing is a physical process in which oxygen from the atmosphere is intaken and the carbon dioxide is released from our body. That is, exchange of gases takes place in the process of breathing. The next is cellular respiration. It is a biochemical process that takes place inside our cells. That is, in which breakdown of simple foods or assimilated foods such as glucose, proteins, fats, etc. occurs to release energy inside the cells. That is, oxidation of food takes place inside the cells to release energy, and this is cellular respiration. So now, respiration involves the following steps. The first one is intake of oxygen. The next step is, in the cells, oxidation of food takes place, and the next step, as a result of oxidation, release of energy takes place, and the next step is, as a result of release of energy, carbon dioxide is produced as a byproduct, and this carbon dioxide is eliminated from our body. So these are the following steps takes place during this respiration: intake of oxygen, oxidation of food, release of energy and elimination of carbon dioxide, that is the byproduct of cellular respiration. Now, how oxygen reaches the cells in our body? So if we take the case of human beings, as all of you know that we breathe in air, and now what happens to this air? Air enters through the nostrils and it will finally reach the lungs through the nostrils, and from the lungs it will reach the bloodstream, and through the blood it will reach each and every cells in our body where energy is to be released. And in the cells, oxidation takes place, the energy is released, and the carbon dioxide formed as a byproduct will be taken back to the lungs and released into the atmosphere. Now, let us talk about the types of cellular respiration. We have already discussed that the breakdown of food takes place in the presence of oxygen, right? But in some cases, it takes place even in the absence of oxygen also. So accordingly, there are two types of cellular respiration. They are aerobic respiration, that is, the respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration, in which the respiration takes place or breakdown of food molecules takes place in the absence of oxygen. Now let us discuss about aerobic respiration. What is aerobic respiration? It is a breakdown of food molecules takes place in the presence of oxygen. There is respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen. As we have already discussed that the most simple assimilated food and which stores more energy is the glucose. The glucose is a 6-carbon compound, that is it contains 6 carbon atoms, and this glucose is oxidized in the presence of oxygen and energy is released, and then products obtained are the carbon dioxide and the water. So here the 6-carbon compound, that is the glucose, is broken down into or oxidized into 1 carbon, simplest form 1 carbon compound, that is carbon dioxide. Breakdown of glucose in the cells involves many steps, and some of these steps occur in the cytoplasm and some occur in the mitochondria. The first step takes place in the cytoplasm and it does not require oxygen. So, and this first step is called as, which takes place in the cytoplasm, is called as glycolysis. Glycolysis. So, the first step of aerobic respiration takes place in the cytoplasm and this step is called as glycolysis. Here, one molecule of glucose glucose is a 6-carbon compound, break down into 2 molecules of pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. During this step, some amount of energy is also released, that is 2 ATP molecules are released. So here this is a cell, you can see it is an animal cell and the nucleus is there. So many cell organelles are there, and you can see in the cytoplasm mitochondria there, cell organelles are there. So here in the cytoplasm what takes place? Glycolysis takes place and the glucose is converted into or break down into pyruvate. Okay, this next step of cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria. First, in the cytoplasm glycolysis takes place, that is glucose is converted into pyruvate, and this pyruvate in the cytoplasm, it enters into the mitochondria here, and after that this pyruvate undergoes certain chemical reactions and pyruvate is break down into more simpler compounds, and at that time more energy is released, and this energy released in the mitochondria is stored in the mitochondria itself in the form of ATP molecules. So the pyruvate enters into the mitochondria and in the matrix, this is the matrix, this is the outer membrane, this is the inner membrane, and inside the inner membrane there present the matrix, and the pyruvate enters into the matrix, and here it is in the presence of oxygen the pyruvate break down into more simpler compounds and the energy is released, and as the energy is produced and is stored in the mitochondria, the mitochondria is called as powerhouse of the cell. It is known as powerhouse of the cells, where the energy is produced and stored. Further breakdown of pyruvic acid or pyruvate takes place in the presence or absence of oxygen. If oxygen is present or available in the cell, the pyruvate enters into the mitochondria and breaks down aerobically, that is in the presence of oxygen. It includes so many chemical reactions and results in the complete breakdown of pyruvic acid or pyruvate into carbon dioxide. So pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. In the mitochondria, in the presence of oxygen, it is completely break down into carbon dioxide, which is a 1-carbon compound. And water is also released and energy is also released. And this process that takes place in the presence of or inside the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen is called as Krebs cycle. Now, in this Krebs cycle, more amount of energy is released as pyruvate breaks down completely. 36 ATP molecules are released in this process. So, in the aerobic respiration, the glucose molecules are break down into pyruvate in the cytoplasm, and at that time some amount of energy is released, and this pyruvate, when it enters into the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen, it is oxidized or break down into carbon dioxide and water, and as a result 36 ATP molecules are produced. So a total of 38 ATP molecules are released during aerobic respiration. And this type of complete breakdown of simple assimilated food with the help of atmospheric oxygen is known as aerobic respiration. If oxygen is not available in the cell, the pyruvic acid breaks down anaerobically to produce ethyl alcohol and lactic acid. If oxygen is not available, the pyruvic acid breaks down anaerobically to produce ethyl alcohol. It takes place in certain organisms like yeast, bacteria, worms, etc. So here in the yeast, for example, in the yeast, the glucose, that is a 6-carbon compound, it breaks down into pyruvate in the cytoplasm, and this pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound, breaks down into ethyl alcohol or ethanol, which is a 2-carbon compound in the cytoplasm itself in the absence of oxygen. And carbon dioxide is also released and some amount of energy is also released. So in yeast, the glucose is break down into pyruvate in the cytoplasm, and this pyruvate, in the absence of oxygen in the cytoplasm, it breaks down into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide and energy. This anaerobic respiration takes place in the yeast is called as fermentation. Here the pyruvate is converted into ethanol, which is a 2-carbon compound, and the pyruvate is not completely break down or completely reduced, and only less amount of energy is produced in this anaerobic respiration. That is, only 2 ATP molecules of energy are produced. See children, we have discussed that normally in human beings aerobic respiration takes place, isn't it? But in some cases anaerobic respiration takes place in human muscle cells also. When a person does lot of vigorous exercise or physical activities, the cell needs more energy, and in such cases the muscle cells lack sufficient oxygen. The glucose break down anaerobically, and some amount of energy is produced. And in these cases, the pyruvate, in the lack of oxygen, it is break down into lactic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound, and release some amount of energy. So in human muscle cells, when it needs more amount of energy, the glucose is 6-carbon compound glucose is converted into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound, and in the cytoplasm itself the pyruvate is converted into 3-carbon or breakdown into lactic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound. Here also glucose is not, or pyruvate is not completely breakdown or reduced, and only some amount of energy is released, that is 2 ATP molecule. Very less amount of energy is released. But the accumulation of this lactic acid in the muscle cells leads to have pain or feel strain. See, as we do so many too much of physical activities, we feel pain in our muscles, no? So children, here is the flow chart of breakdown of glucose by various pathways. As we have discussed, that aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration of glucose molecules. The glucose molecules, which is a 6-carbon compound, breaks down into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound in the cytoplasm. And this pyruvate, or further breakdown of this pyruvate, takes place in 3 ways or 3 pathways in different organisms. Here, first, the pyruvate breaks down into ethanol in the absence of oxygen, and this takes place in yeast. And carbon dioxide also is released and some amount of energy is released. Now the next pathway is this pyruvate, in the lack of oxygen in human muscle cells, break down into lactic acid and energy. The next pathway is the pyruvate. In the presence of oxygen, the pyruvate enters into the mitochondria and breaks down into carbon dioxide. Here the pyruvate is completely break down into carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released. So these are the 3 pathways by which the glucose is break down into ethanol, lactic acid and carbon dioxide. Anaerobically, in the absence of oxygen, it breaks down into ethanol, and in the lack of oxygen in human muscle cells, the pyruvate or glucose breaks down into lactic acid, and in the presence of oxygen in the mitochondria, the pyruvate completely breaks down into carbon dioxide and release energy. As a result of cellular respiration, the chemical energy in the form of ATP is produced, isn't it? So ATP, what is ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. These ATP molecules are produced by the addition of an inorganic phosphate into ADP, that is adenosine diphosphate. So as a result of the addition of an inorganic phosphate into adenosine diphosphate, what is produced? ATP is produced. So for this production of ATP molecules also, what is needed? Energy. Energy is needed. So once these ATP molecules are produced, these ATP molecules are used for all these metabolic activities in the cells. Like that, for this ATP molecules, production of ATP molecules also, what is required? Energy is required. See children, a normal battery can provide energy for working different kinds of equipments, no? Like that, ATP molecules are used as energy currency for most of the cellular processes, such as transfer of nerve impulses, protein synthesis, contraction and relaxation of muscles, etc. etc. So all these endothermic process, that is all these energy driven processes, energy needed processes, that is endothermic processes, need energy locked in ATP molecules in the form of phosphate bonds. So, whenever the energy is needed for the cells, the terminal phosphate linkage, that is this one, their terminal phosphate linkage is broken from the ATP molecules. The terminal phosphate linkage is broken down and the energy equivalent to 30.5 kilojoule per molecule is released. Okay, so children, see, for example, I'll say an example. You need money for buying so many items or some other purposes, no? Where do you get this money from? You ask your parents, right? And they will give you money. So they give currencies from which they have saved or stored, isn't it? If you want more money for some other expenses, they will give more currencies. No? Like that, whenever the cell needs more energy, the more number of ATP molecules are given. So, we can call these ATP molecules as the energy currency of the cell. Okay, so for all these metabolic cellular activities or the energy driven metabolic activities, what is needed? The ATP molecules are needed. And these ATP molecules are called as energy currencies, as they are giving energy for all these molecular activities. So, I hope all of you understood the aerobic and anaerobic respiration and the release of energy. Okay. I hope you understood the two types of respiration, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay. Now, how will you differentiate this aerobic and anaerobic respiration? So, what are the differences? Aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen and anaerobic respiration in the absence of oxygen. Here, aerobic respiration, complete breakdown of glucose takes place, and anaerobic respiration, incomplete breakdown of glucose. Now, 38 molecules of ATP are produced in aerobic respiration, but in anaerobic respiration, only 2 ATP molecules are produced. The next difference is the end products of aerobic respiration are carbon dioxide and water. But the other one, in the anaerobic respiration, ethyl alcohol or lactic acid and carbon dioxide are the end products. The next one is aerobic respiration takes place in cytoplasm and mitochondria. But in anaerobic respiration, it takes place in cytoplasm. Mitochondria is not involved in the anaerobic respiration. So these are the differences. Next, we can discuss about the respiration in plants. Plants are aerobic organisms and the gaseous exchange takes place by the process of diffusion through stomata. There are large intercellular spaces in between the plant cells, and this ensures that all the cells are in contact with air. We have already discussed that during photosynthesis, plants need carbon dioxide and release oxygen. In plants, during daytime, the release of oxygen during photosynthesis is used in the aerobic respiration. At night, when there is no photosynthesis, utilization of oxygen from atmosphere and elimination of carbon dioxide occurs through stomata. So, the plants release carbon dioxide during night when there is no photosynthesis and release oxygen during daytime when carbon dioxide is consumed for photosynthesis. Since the plants remain fixed in nature, they do not require excess energy. Hence, the rate of respiration is also comparatively low. Here, is a lab activity to show that carbon dioxide is produced during respiration in plants. To do the experiment we require test tube, beaker containing distilled water, germinating seeds, cork with one hole, a conical flask, measuring cylinder, freshly prepared potassium hydroxide solution, petroleum jelly, a glass delivery tube bent twice at right angles. Procedure: put a few germinating seeds in a conical flask. Pour potassium hydroxide solution in measuring cylinder. Transfer the KOH solution into a small test tube. Tie a cotton thread to the neck of the test tube and suspend the tube in the conical flask. Close the mouth of the conical flask with the cork. Insert one end of the glass tube into the conical flask through the cork and dip the other end in the beaker containing water. Take some petroleum jelly and apply it on the cork to make the apparatus airtight. Keep the apparatus undisturbed for 2 hours. Observation: what do you observe after 2 hours? It is observed that the water level in the delivery tube rises in the end dipped in the beaker containing water. Conclusion: from this we can conclude that the germinating seeds in the conical flask release carbon dioxide during respiration, which is absorbed by the potassium hydroxide. This creates a partial vacuum in the flask and the vacuum forces the water up the delivery tube. This proves that the germinating seeds produce carbon dioxide during respiration.
Have you ever observed fishes in aquarium? Most of you have observed, no? They open and close the mouth and operculum frequently. You can see in this video, the fishes open and closes its mouth frequently, no? Why do they do so? How is the opening and closing of the mouth and operculum related? Aquatic organisms need to take the oxygen dissolved in water. As the amount of oxygen is fairly low in water compared to the amount of oxygen in air, the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is much faster. That is why the fishes opens and closes its mouth frequently. Fishes take in water through their mouth and force it towards the gills, which is rich in blood capillaries. In the gills, the oxygen dissolved is taken up by the blood capillaries and the carbon dioxide is released into external water through the operculum. In terrestrial organisms, different animals have different organs to take the oxygen directly from the atmosphere. Now, let us recollect the topics discussed today. We have discussed respiration, aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, exchange of gases in plants for the respiration, and exchange of gases in aquatic animals and terrestrial animals. So children, I hope all of you understood the basic things about the life process respiration. Now read the textbook properly and write the answers for the questions attached. Now in the next video, you can study the respiratory system in human beings and how it works. Okay children, thank you.